My name is Jason.
And my name is Tom.
And this is Fear of a Black Dragon, an old school RPG podcast.
And in this episode, we bring you all the salient information about Crown of Salt.
Our first segment is the basic crawl.
Crown of Salt is a 120-page adventure module compatible with Merkborg. It was written, illustrated, and laid out by Tanya Herrero. From the module. There is a church in the depths of the Salt Plains, a forgotten temple, consecrated to a benevolent and righteous God. It was desecrated by an arrogant and ruthless king. The blood of the faithful dyed his steel red. The god shed his tears over the valley, transforming it into a wasteland of salt and misery. Before fading from the memory of men, the god cursed the defiler to become a hated and repulsive being that would poison and corrode everything he touched, imprisoning him with only his crown to remind him of all he had lost. People call him the Cantigaster, and everyone knows his story.
Let's talk about the contents of Crown of Salt. To start, I do think it's important to understand that everything I'm about to detail is presented alongside a huge amount of very nice artwork. It is not just blocks of text. More on that later. The book begins with a D12 table of occult treasures, magical items that can be dropped in as treasure wherever needed. From there, we have the story about the Cantigaster that Tom just read to you, which is spread out over several pages of artwork. From there, we have D12 reasons to risk one's life, adventuring hooks, essentially. The next section details the village of Saltburg, which is where our adventure begins, and the mysterious hirelings waiting for the characters at Saltburg's inn. Next is a section called A Night in the Woods, which is a series of random encounters the characters might face as they set out for the Salt Rifts in search of the Cantigaster. Then we have a section about the descent into the Salt Rifts, including environmental rules. We are then presented with 5 sanctuaries, places the characters can rest and recuperate while pressing ever deeper into the rift in search of the temple the Cantigaster calls its lair. From there we have sections for dwellers, threats, and oddities, all of which are set-piece encounters within the Salt Rifts. Some highlights here include Remember Garrick, an extremely weird encounter with a person who claims to know the party, the Immortal Lobster, a photo-negative polar bear, salinized dinosaurs, and the Rift's Widow, a titanic mythic spider. We also have a collection of random encounters that can be peppered between the various set-piece encounters. The next major section of the book is The Promised Princess, which tells more of the story of the Cantigaster, the woman who loved him, and the sword that is integral to the plans of the mysterious hirelings. There is a short dungeon crawl attached to this, wherein the party can find said sword and encounter a dragon in a tar pit. Next follows the story of Enhydros, a horror of the ancient deep, and the story of a forgotten king who went to war with it. Spoiler alert, the forgotten king is the Cantigaster, protecting the abyssal gate from being opened, unleashing Enhydros into the world again. The last section of the book is the temple dungeon crawl, where the party will encounter the Cantigaster and perhaps inadvertently free the Enhydros. The temple has 2 levels and roughly 30 keyed locations. Some highlights include the firewall protecting the temple, a strange watery birthing chamber, mech-like pelagic armor, an ossuary, and Shadow of the Megalodon. Let's talk about our bona fides. Tom.
I have, much to my annoyance, as you predicted, Jason, only read it.
I ran it happily over the course of 6 sessions using trophy gold. Things we liked about Crown of Salt. I am not going to bury the lead here. This is an all-timer for me. This is an all-timer adventure module.
Like everything, episode over, let's go home. It's
Deep Carbon Observatory. It's Sailors on the Starless Sea. I really love The Corruption of Pellars. It's up there with those modules for me. Like, it is an all-timer. I had so much fun running it. That's just praise to sort of set up the conversation. It's
yes,
incredible.
To explain my annoyance to the listener who maybe doesn't know about this, Jason and I have a sort of thing where if we haven't run an adventure before we do an episode about it and we really, really like it, then we feel annoyed because now it'll feel like kind of like we can't do it.
Yeah, it's like wasted effort because, well, we already did the episode on Fearful Like Dragon about it, right? Yeah. You should set that aside,
this one,
Tom, because
I would just do this anyway.
This is a fun as hell adventure.
Yeah.
Let's get into it. Everything in Crown of Salt feels either mythic or legendary, or it feels alien, like utterly alien.
Yeah.
And that combination is terrific. It's like in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Frodo doesn't just escape from a giant spider. He escapes from Shelob.
A specific one, yeah.
A specific mythic character in the story. It's that kind of thing. The monsters feel either like that, a sort of legendary creature, or they feel like something totally Lovecraftian, very weird and alien, but it's an alien that has the aesthetic of the ocean and of salt. And so it's this deep sea alien. It's incredible.
Really, for the whole thing, the mood to me, it feels abyssal, right? Like you're descending.
Abyssal. That's perfect. Yeah, it's perfect. Also, the theming is incredible. The way that Tanya has used theme to connect up so many ideas, both visually as well as textually, it works great. Everything feels salty or rusted, encrusted. It really comes through. And then that aesthetic idea is very much reflected in the themes of the actual story, too. This idea of something old and rusted over and encrusted. It's really, really terrific. Those are my high-level thoughts.
Yeah, the same. And I think what I noticed, at least from reading it, is that when you are reading it, it's explaining, it's something I always like is where it's kind of explaining what the story might feel like to you. You know, you can imagine things happen. When we come to talk about a very specific encounter in a second, that's like that, a short story version of that. And I will say it looks and feels really big, but it's actually pretty straightforward. Like when you first start reading it, you think, oh, this is going to be gargantuan. But actually, I think in practice, to run it and to play it would be not that hard. It's you journey from one place to the next. There's a dungeon. If you were to break it down like that, that sounds not like too much of a thing, but it is. I think it's also worth mentioning that the style of the layout and the graphics, I've written down in there it's contiguous with, which is a dubious use of that adjective, but you can see it butting up against the style of Mörk Borg, the way it's done by the original book and everything, but it's not the same. You can easily see that it's a different artist. It's its own thing. It's just really great. Yeah.
It's just enough like it, but just enough different. It's a really, really great mix. Speaking of the artwork, it's all terrific. The actual illustrations are terrific, but also Tanya's done this really beautiful thing with color. I love it when a book uses color to tell the story of the adventure, and it's a subtle thing. I don't think it's an easy thing to do, but I think it's done really, really well here. I know you have some notes on that.
I do, yeah. So it has the color palette is mostly blacks and whites, but a lot of this kind of phosphorescent green, and that green, I think, if I'm interpreting this correctly, although you don't have to interpret it consciously, we'll come to that in a second, represents the abyss, the creeping danger. And there is a part where it suddenly breaks. And I remember when I first turned that page being disappointed. I was like, oh, this is not right. There's a picture of a fairy tale king and a princess, and they're just in black and white. But that's on purpose, because as that story goes on and has a sad ending, the phosphorescent colour starts to infiltrate the black and white palette of that. And that is wonderful. And this is a great example as well of how you can create your own system of information that the audience will internalize unconsciously. An easy example to use is, let's do a movie one, is that when you start watching Memento, or in fact a lot of films, when there's a flashback, it's in black and white. When it's present day action, it's in colour. And that's a thing that's really simple. You figure it out the second time you see it, probably the first, definitely the second. You do that in graphic design and in writing as well, and even, I would say, in GMing. If you're doing it on purpose. And the people who are experiencing it won't realize it necessarily consciously, but it will still affect them, and they will intrinsically understand what it means when a certain tone of voice is used or whatever, or a certain colour in a picture. And that's also why it's important to know what your system is and to stick to it, because if you break it by mistake, you'll confuse and upset people and they won't be able to tell what's going on. And I do want to say as well, actually, when we're talking about the design, there's a lot of good stuff with fonts here. Now, we all know Mörk Borg and fonts, but this one has got some great stuff where it's like the inverse pyramid news story design, right? So the author, Tanya, she's, if you're skimming to look for the info, it's in big fonts that are clear and easy to read. Then detailed information is a bit smaller, still easy to read. And then things like background info or fun little bits will be in this sort of slightly gothic, not that, like, it's not impossible to read, but it's harder. And that, I think, is a deliberate decision as well, because if you're looking quickly for information while flipping through the book, your eyes will skip over it and you won't bother reading it until you actually want to, and you come back, and that's really good. So this is all great stuff. This is all like real design nerdery. But when you see it all put together like this across 120, or as Jason likes to call it, 61 pages, because he's using the double spreads.
Depends on how you count, yes.
Yeah.
Those are all such good notes, because in play it feels that way. I have to say, I have never felt simultaneously very well supported and comfortable running a module, like, oh, I've got this, I know I feel very comfortable running the next thing on the page, while also having quite a lot of it be secret, because the way Tanya has laid out the order of information, going back to order of information, going back to presentation, the way it's done, it's really, really a little stroke of genius, because the backstory of the adventure is not given to you all up front. It's divided up throughout the book, and the legend parts of the text are presented in this mythic or fairy tale kind of way, which to me suggests that you're meant to read it to the players, which I did. I don't know if you're supposed to, but I did, and that worked out really great. You would have these fairy tale introductions, telling little bits of the story, but even those little bits are misleading. They're not the whole story. They're not even the right story, right? You don't figure out the right story until the end, but it's the right story for that part of the adventure. Yes, it's the bit you need at the time, right? It's the bit you need at that moment. And so when you're running this, it's great because you can just stay within that section and not even read ahead. I mean, I think it's probably smart to read ahead just to get a kind of a sense of what's going on, but you don't have to. I think you can just kind of live in that part of the adventure that's covered by that part of the fairy tale, and then you kind of switch. And what I would do is from session to session, whenever we would kind of transition to the next part of the fairy tale, I would start the session by just reading that. And I have to tell you, the players were so locked in. It was just such a good way of kicking things off each session. It locked all the players in. And even though, like, it's strictly speaking out of character information, I have a particular play culture where that doesn't matter. But also, it's a kind of play culture where the players actually lean into it. Like they know their characters are not supposed to know that, right? And so they play with that and they lean into it in cool ways. But yeah, the way the text is divided up like that, you can kind of live in that little section, and then you get to the next part of the fairy tale and the information changes a little bit, the story changes a little bit, and then you just kind of live in that part of the adventure. And it was great. It was so, so good. I really, really wish more adventures in the future, more module writers in the future would take a page from this book, because it was superb. It was one of the truly most pleasurable game running experiences from a module that I've done in really a long, long time. No, I mean, that's great to hear, because that's what when I was reading it's what I hoped was true. There's a bit early on to give an even smaller example of this, because like you're talking about the unfolding legends, that's sort of across the course of the whole adventure. But very early on, there's an example of this that takes place across, I would say, maybe 1.5 pages, which is that in the intro, we're told about this crow that will follow people around and squawk the word liar, liar. Yeah. And you find out after that there's a bit about the scavengers that go into the wasteland and the hidden monsters, and the crow, you find out, sees through their disguise, and that's exceptional, right? That's the twist. Like, the reason it's saying liar is because they actually are. It was like reading a microfiction. The unfolding of events was immediately there in my mind. But and this is the thing, even if you never found out anything after that first bit, a crow squawking the word liar is just an amazing, creepy bit of magical realism. Your imagination fires off. Yeah. I had one player in my group, Amanda, who really, really grabbed onto the crow detail. And we had so much fun playing with that. And I had so much fun changing everyone's expectations about what the crow meant. Yeah. And then when we get to the part of the myth, when we get to the part of the story where we learn that, where it's heavily, heavily implied that the crow is the familiar of the Forgotten King's sorcerer, one of the only things to survive this encounter within Hydros, it really, really ties everything together. And also going back to the way the story is divided up, the crow begins to change its language as you get deeper into the dungeon. It starts saying new words as you get further in. And those new words, crown, sacrifice, and something else. As the crow expands its vocabulary, the crow is also telling you part of the story in its way.
Yeah.
It was terrific. It worked really great. There's so many little things in Crown of Salt for players to grab onto, and indeed for the GM to grab onto. This is especially good for a game like Trophy Gold, which has a lot of player-authored stuff that happens at the table. It's nice to have this module that is very much inviting you to grab onto the thing that interests you most and see where it goes. And the way this is structured, it really sets you up well for that. This is not a hex crawl. This is not a point crawl. This is really just a series of set pieces until you get to the dungeon parts. And that was great for me personally. I really love when adventures are divided up as just a sequence of set pieces. It's rare. I don't think you see it very often. It's kind of linear in a certain sense because you're just kind of stringing together set piece encounters with places to rest and recuperate, with weird oddballs they might run into. But it's great for how I run a game, because what I got to do as I was preparing each session was I would just look at the section we're in and I would be like, okay, these 3 things are really cool to me. These are the 3 things we're going to do.
Yep.
And I could play Crown of Salt again and pick totally different things, have a really different experience, but it would still feel very fundamentally like Crown of Salt. And I think that's amazing. Like, I just love it. And they're great set pieces. They're really, really good.
Yeah.
They're fantastic.
There's one encounter I have to talk about. I don't know how much. Should we just explain what it is? Because it's called Remember Garrick. And
it's great.
To me, it's like a whole, you could just do a scenario that's just this.
It was so good. We had during our 6 session run, we had about like 3 really big standout moments that like I think we're all as a player group going to be talking about for a long time. And Remember Garrick was one of them. What happens, listeners, is the characters are deep into this like underground salt rift thing, and suddenly this NPC just shows up and claims to know them. But they don't. He's not anyone they know. So he claims to know them. And the way I played him is he was a character that got left behind and they came back to get him. And he was so happy they came back to get him. But the text tells you that whenever someone starts talking about him, they suddenly remember something about him. So then the player has to come up with a made-up memory of this guy, Garrick. And that was really, really fun. It was really, really fun to kind of mess with everyone's expectations and to have this character who's essentially gaslighting the party.
Oh yeah,
right?
and of course after he reaches a certain number of memories, something terrible happens. Obviously, that's always given. But it's just so great. It reminds me of like a 1960s sci-fi story or something with creepy pod people that arrive in town or something. It's just great.
Yeah. It was really, really terrific. I will say that the sort of mid-boss encounter with the whole like Promised Princess story and the dragon is really great. It's perfectly placed, perfectly sized. It's a little tiny half dungeon crawl, but with a really big boss encounter at the end.
Yeah.
And this sword. We're going to talk more about the hirelings in the next segment, but the sword is like very, very important to what the hirelings are up to. And so there's a real question of, will the party even find the sword? The hirelings are trying to guide them to it, but will the players like pick up on this and think that something is up? And so there's that sort of like tension there as well, that sort of mystery to it, which is really, really terrific. But just the placement and the size of that Promised Princess little story is great. Sadly, my group didn't do much of the dungeon crawl at the temple because by the time we got to the temple, they were already like killing each other. They were already like at each other's throats. And I think we had like essentially like a near TPK by the end. But for Marie, the temple dungeon crawl is really good.
That happens.
But yeah,
sometimes.
just good stuff. So good. Did you have anything else you want to say about it?
No, I don't. I think we've covered everything I had to say about it. I mean, I'm just going from a read, but from what I guess this is another way of praising it, is that my impression from reading it appears to be what happens when you run it, and that's usually a good thing, I would say.
It's a good sign. Yeah, it really is. Really is. We do have some questions here. I think. Well, you do. So what
I've got a couple of questions, and I think the absolute pettiness of these questions will illustrate how overall good a product this is. Firstly, there's a section of random encounters which to me feels kind of superfluous after you've just had several sections of much more specific encounters.
Yeah.
It feels like this could have been DLC or something. I don't know.
It worked for me.
Yeah.
It worked for me because of the way I described it earlier, which is I use the sort of like set piece encounters, those threats and oddities or whatever, those three like set piece encounter sections. I picked and choose to sort of like essentially created a linear point crawl with those various set pieces. But sometimes in Trophy Gold, a die roll comes up where you need something to interject and to interrupt that. Usually a monster encounter. And so the random encounters were good for that.
Well, that's
the
true.
Random encounters were to pepper things in as you needed. So it was just as needed kind of thing.
Yeah, and it does occur to me there is actually sort of it could help with like a palette choice as well, because there are sort of, as you say, there are sort of several crowns of salt in here, and there are some of those set pieces are a bit more kind of wacky gonzo, Morkborg dark fun.
A little bit,
And if I think my instinct would be to do it very po-faced, playing it straight. So I'd probably leave out some of those things, like, is it kind of salted dinosaurs or whatever? Like, they might not make it into my game, for example.
I didn't use the dinosaurs, not because of any tone reasons. It just didn't really feel right for what we were doing. The lobster, I think, can be really silly if not played right. But I used it, and it was a good moment for us.
Good.
So I think it kind of comes down to how you play it, I think, is a big part of it too. But what's your other question?
And my other question is a slight grumble about there's the pelagic armor, which is like a mech suit you can get into. And I love that it's random. When you take an action, what happens is random because you don't know what the controls do.
Yeah.
Which reminds me of a very good paranoia scenario in a submarine where you also you're given a handout of the dashboard and no instructions. My one change I would do to this is, like, if you hit the same button again, like, your option should be do something random or do a thing you've done before. That's all I would do. But I will say as well, there are lots of these little mini games for different activities throughout the module, which is quite fun. I'm a big fan of the mini game, or at least the die roll where something unusual happens rather than
We've
just
done a topic on that, I think.
We have, exactly. We did the mini games, and it's used to good effect here, I think. Yeah, nice stuff.
Fantastic. Well, let's go to the chain lightning round. Tom.
Okay, let's start with one of the hirelings. Liselotte, the Lion's Maiden. A daughter of farmers in the outskirts of Schleswig, she killed a knight of King Fathmu IX and stole his armour, and she covets the Cantigaster's poison to murder the king.
The Jug and the Crown. This is the inn in Saltburg. The stench of sweat and salt mingles with that of alcohol and roasted chicken. It clings to the throat. Several individuals, with only their cracked lips in common, spend their savings on what could be their last meal. Mercenaries and scum.
From the description of the salt desert area. The salt falls into the depths of the white wasteland rifts, like cascades of iridescent crystal under the sun.
Howls in the night. Like rusted iron scraping against slate, forgotten metal takes on a new form. Still thirsty for blood, the rust pack draws near.
And from that bit of legendary background about halfway through, the king had to march to protect his kingdom, but he promised himself to the princess and gave her a blade that, like their love, would never rust. Only the familiar of his sorcerer returned. The promised princess followed it after the king. The world also forgot her name.
Feet sink into a thick, white substance, guano. When looking up, the characters are met with the glowing eyes of a colony of bats. They address the group with a voice of many voices, a fragment of your destiny in exchange for a safe passage. Let's go to the expert delve. Hey listeners, Jason here. I want to let you know about a brand new show. It's called the Gauntlet Podcast 2nd Edition, and it's an exploration and celebration of the indie tabletop RPG scene. The show is called 2nd Edition because it's a reboot of the old Gauntlet podcast, but also because in this new format, my co-host Wes and I are looking back at a classic indie RPG and then talking about what we would do if we were making a 2nd edition of that game. As of this recording, we've already covered Dance of the Damned, The Sword, the Crown, and the Unspeakable Power, and Dogs in the Vineyard, and we have plenty more in the pipeline. Wes and I will also be chatting with folks both in and outside the Gauntlet community about different gaming-related topics, such as fandom in TTRPGs, the effects of the Satanic Panic in the early 80s and 90s, genre in games, and much more. The Gauntlet Podcast 2nd Edition is a Patreon exclusive. We've created this show for the Ride or Die Gauntlet fans who support everything we do on Patreon. There will be a new episode in the Patreon feed every single week, and you can get exclusive access by making a $2 or higher pledge. We're at patreon.com/gauntlet. Thanks. It's the Expert Delve. I originally pitched this idea, Tom, as an online play topic, and I think we will probably talk a little bit about online play. It's something we've talked about in the past. But as I got thinking about this topic, I think there's something else. There was something else kind of going on that I want to unpack. So I did something in my run of Crown of Salt. It's in session 5. If people are watching the YouTube, you can go skip ahead and see what I'm talking about. I did something that was a little unusual, not something I'd ever done before. It worked really, really well. But I've been thinking a lot about why it worked well and what lessons there might be. And I'm not sure if it's necessarily an online play thing or if it's more of a table culture thing or if there's something transportable there for in-person play. So just help me unpack this, okay?
Okay.
All right. The Hirelings. This is a big, big spoiler warning. We've done a lot of spoilers already.
I mean, we've already...
This is the biggest of them, though, right? The Hirelings that they meet in Saltburg, who try to attach themselves to the party, they are actually possessed by these sort of these alien mollusk things called the Latrafax, I believe. And these alien mollusk things, who are essentially like body snatcher type entities, they're trying to get the party to, first of all, find the sword of the promised princess. They are not able to handle the sword because of magical reasons, and the sword is needed to break the barrier, the fire barrier that protects the temple that the Cantagaster is in. Furthermore, they want to destroy the Cantagaster, and failing that, they want to get to the Abyssal Gate and open the Abyssal Gate. Their whole plan is, however they have to do it, to destroy the Cantagaster and free Anhydros and cover the world in a sort of ocean. Mm-hmm. That's their plan. And I will say, this maybe should have been the last segment, but it was very, very fun playing these Hirelings. These Hirelings are terrific. You shouted out Lieselot in your Chain Lightning round. All 4 of them are fantastic. And I had a lot of fun playing them. Just if you're the kind of GM who loves playing NPCs, they're great. But a thing happened where we're like 5 sessions in, and one of the player characters was on their absolute last leg. They had like nothing left to give and they were going to die. So I presented some options. I was like, well, we could find a way to get back to town, maybe using magic so you can recuperate. Maybe if you want to spend some hunt tokens to clear a ruin, I'll let you do that. I presented some options. But one option I presented was, one of the Hirelings pulls you aside to an out-of-the-way place and only you return. But when you return, you are fully restored. Well, that was very cryptic, and the player obviously chose that option. And what I was going to have happen was the Latrafax was going to take over the player character and change that player character's goals. Now, I will say that I know my players really well. They're all really good players, and I know what kind of play style they like, and so I knew that they would be into this. And so that was one thing I had in my back pocket. But also, I wanted to think of ways to make this moment still have some tension, still have some secrecy, and not just have it be strictly out of character knowledge. So I was like, okay, well, we can maybe handle this in private message. Like I can just message to this player, like what the Hireling is doing to them. Maybe in between sessions, I tell them more about what's going on. But what I decided to do instead, and this is the thing I want your help with. What I decided to do instead was I asked every other player to remove their headset. And then I had them watch Jazzy, that's the player, watch Jazzy and I role play the scene so they could see us role playing it. And I was particularly big with my hand movements and stuff. And Jazzy was reacting in a very big way. They could see something was going on, but they didn't know what was going on. And then later, when this happened to another player because of some bad die rolls, I had the 2 remaining non-infected players again take off their headset. And in this instance, we have a shared die roller and there were some die rolls involved. So the other players who couldn't hear us role playing, could see us role playing, and they could see the die rolls, but they didn't know what any of it was about. And there's one way where I think this could have been frustrating, but in fact, it was a huge hit. Everyone loved it. It was really, really big hit. The two players who ultimately who always had to take their headset off, they were super into it. They were like, this was so tense. I know something is going on, but I don't know what is going on. And we've had plenty of conversations, you and I, about the dangers of secrets at the table and how sometimes like secrets, if not done properly, don't land, they don't work. But in this case, it was secrets at the table that totally worked. And the online play tools were at least partially responsible for that. And so what I'm trying to figure out is, why was this a huge hit? What about it made it different? Does that make sense?
Yes, and I think I know the answer to this, or at least an answer to it. Mm-hmm. And that is that when you do this, you're using the unique affordances of the tabletop role-playing game activity and genre to provide limited information to certain players and not to others. And also, what's going on here and why this is better than a secret that was completely invisible to everyone else. There is, in one of the numerous Hitchhiker's Guide sequels that I read, this is the one thing I remember from some of those books, Douglas Adams wrote, there's a sort of joke about a sport called Brockian Ultra Cricket. And the joke is that all of the stadiums have a brick wall built around the pitch so that the crowd are sitting in the seats, but they can't actually see anything. And the reason for that is because the organisers know that a crowd that thinks it's missing the match of the century is more excited than a crowd that knows it's watching a very average game. And so similarly, what you've got here is if you had done that and no one else had an inkling that there was even a secret to be had, there's nothing for them to get excited about. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
But because they're aware that something is going on, that's one of the key things. And the second thing is, talking about the affordances, is it's the mechanically it's dice rolls that people can see. Mm-hmm. And it's also just the system of how we play role-playing games, talking to each other and sort of acting. And I'll give you an example of a very similar thing that happened in Dungeon Crawl Classics game I ran. So this would have been about a year or two ago. And there was a bit like an island full of sort of plant people that were creating doppelgangers and things. And every so often on that island, there would be a bit where, someone would roll a die and I'd look at it, we'd all look at the number, and I'd go, just come over to the bar with me for a second, and we could have a bit of a chat, and then we'd go there and I'd sort of talk to them, and everyone else would be at the table watching, knowing something was going on, and something would be going on, and sometimes they were becoming a pod person, and sometimes they weren't.
Right.
And that was it. It's because you've got this glimpse, and you've also got this motivation, it's giving you a way in to have your character sort of maybe be able to, even though it's out of character knowledge, in character, you could justify that as saying, oh, well, they have an inkling something is wrong. That's all you need, isn't it? Yeah. And so you're giving people a chance to try and access this secret information, or at least have fun trying to guess what it might be, because they can think, oh, what happened when they did that die roll? What was that was different from before? That's what's so fun. It's the speculation, I think. That's what's going on, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's right. One thing that I think is worth pointing out about how this unfurled for our play group is, like in your example, your players who had an inkling. I had one player who they were like, obviously, as a player, they knew something was going on, right? But they, in character, decided to do something about it. And the reason why I think it landed and didn't feel cheap, it wasn't just like, oh, I have an inkling, though I would have accepted that. That would have been fine. But also, the hirelings up to that point had been acting really strange. They were clearly up to something. The group just didn't know what, but they were clearly up to something. Also, credit to the two players who ended up being taken over by the Latrofexes. It's a credit to their skill as role players, but this might be maybe something as a player. If this happens to you, you could maybe do this in the future, listeners. They changed the way they played their characters in a distinct way. It was subtle. It wasn't super over the top, but they changed their cadence. They changed the way they spoke, and they became just like slightly more robotic or detached. And it was so well done. And again, it helped inform the other players like kind of doing something about it. And as I look back on it, I can tell that the two players who were taken over what they were doing was they were creating an on-ramp for the other players to do something about this situation. Even though they were having fun playing the secret villains, they still wanted the whole group to succeed. So they were kind of using their role play to try to signal something, or to justify something. It was really, really good. It's a really, really great thing. It's so funny because I'm on record going back 10 years now that I am very skeptical of secrets at the table. When I was really, really super into Forge theory and stuff like that, I was very strictly against the idea of secrets at the table. There's no secrets at the table. Like, you can absolutely handle things out of character and it's no big deal and it's not going to ruin the experience for anyone. But here was an instance where I actively embraced the idea of secrets at the table, but I'm happy that I was able to do it in a way that was engaging and fun. And I do think the online play tools had a role to play here.
Yeah. They give you more, different options, from what you would have.
Some options, yeah. One thing I'm remembering back to, this is not really secrets at the table so much, but one of the things I used to really love playing Monster Hearts, for example. We would play Monster Hearts online, and the players would often do this thing, because they're playing teenagers, where they would be texting each other.
Yep.
And they would use the chat as their cell phone texting medium. And in some sense, that was kind of like sharing information a little bit, not quite secret because we could all see the chat, but it still had the feeling of, here's a thing going on that only we know about.
Yeah. Oh, and I think even just having the back channel online is one of its is something you can't really replicate in face-to-face, because it would just be people muttering and overlapping. Right. But when you're doing it on text, maybe you could do it at the table on phones. It's just great, especially if you're playing something set in the real world or things that you can look up on Wikipedia and someone can go, oh, actually, it turns out it's 4 hours to drive from here to Dallas.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's great for the things you can do online. I think it's not just about secrets. It's about what can we call partial or differentiated information control, right? So, for example, playing online is ideal for handouts and stuff, although you do have to prep. You can't just scribble things down that quickly and make them. But you can give things to individual players without anyone else seeing what they are. So, for example, in the beloved Deathmatch Island, there is a thing where there are handout forms that people get, giving them instructions. And what you can't see at a glance is when you first see it, you're here's form 1, here's form 2, here's blah, blah, blah. They all look identical. Why are these separate files? They're not identical. One or two of them have slightly different instructions for the players. And you can do that kind of thing, which is great fun. And even if the players talk about it and compare notes, they might not notice straight away. And actually, of course, there's loads of, let's not go into all the various technical things you can do on virtual tabletops, but there's loads of stuff you can do with secrets there. You can make tokens be able to see different things. And they're really helpful. And you can use layers to suddenly reveal information, all that kind of thing. Honestly, I'm using tokens and maps and visualizations online in ways I would never attempt on paper at a table, because it's just impractical.
I have to say, I have become, I don't know, maybe I'm not looped into VTTs enough, or maybe it's because I've been having some really particular business experiences related to VTTs at this moment, but I've become increasingly skeptical of the VTT. I definitely question its utility for the types of games I play and the way I run games. That is without doubt. I question its utility. But I'm also starting to question its utility for more traditional games, because I feel like a lot of things in the VTTs that are out there, I think they add extra complexity that is not needed.
Yeah.
And I don't know for sure, because again, I'm a little bit speaking outside my wheelhouse here. But one of the things I really liked about my take your headset off thing was it was really easy to do, right?
Well, that's the thing, is one of the best things about online and virtually is you can just do stuff with the camera and with the physical setup.
I do that. Oh gosh, this is something I've been doing I've been running this West Marches thing. Well, actually, I've always done this, but I've really kind of gone into overdrive with my West Marches thing. I've done this thing where I use the camera and the darkness of my room, and indeed my sort of RGB ring light, which can do all kinds of colors and stuff now. I adjust my environment, not just for the session, but from scene to scene. And if the character's entering into a dark space, I will change my environment in that moment to convey that a little bit better. Again, something you can only do in an online space.
I think you're right. I think the VTT thing is not so necessary. I just want the video and audio to work and to be able to share files with people. I'm not too fussed about a lot of the other stuff, but I will now. I do think there are a couple of things that specifically work for And it's funny you brought up Monster Hearts, because all of my upcoming examples are from Monster Hearts. I think this is very applicable to all kinds of games, but this is the game we were running. So one thing is about like file sharing and playing stuff to people during, well, sometimes during the game, sometimes between sessions. I normally don't do, for example, background audio. It always messes up the connection for someone in the group.
It's a thing.
And also you can't concentrate, and the volume's a bit... But just going, oh, you hear this is good. As is having hold screen music while people are waiting, like maybe during a break. And so here's one thing. I think you'll enjoy this. So... Well, I think you'll enjoy all three of these things, but this is the first one.
Hit me with it.
When I was running Monster Hearts, me and my co-GM, Kat, created an MP3 file of a scratchy, crackly answer phone message.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently from one of the PC's mothers in the afterlife, or maybe in the spooky hotel on the edge of town, when she sort of finally stopped talking, you could hear Summertime sung by Ella Fitzgerald in the background on a gramophone, and what sounded like a pig grunting, and then suddenly footsteps and the phone being hung up. And the players absolutely fixated on this thing, like, because I gave them listen to it afterwards. Between sessions, that was all they could, like, they were listening to it over and over, trying to figure out what was going on in it. The thing what you could do here is the sort of in character, out of character thing is, after the session, just give the link to the player whose PC kept the answering machine tape. And they can share it with the others or not.
Yeah.
And that was amazing. So that's like a little artifact you could do. You play it once and everyone goes, what was that? And then they can revisit it. That's something you can only really do online, I would say.
Yeah.
And then similarly with video. So quite often I'll do things like creating a little mood trailer for a game.
Oh, okay.
And I send it to people beforehand. I've done that a bit, made out of like movie clips that I think fit the mood and with music. And for this one, Monster Hearts Jindabyne, which was set in 1980s Australia, I made a sort of VHS tape opening credits scene with the PCs in it and stuff. And links to this in the show notes. Yeah. This kind of thing, though, is useful for when you've got to deliver a lot of information, rather than, and again, so coming to the apportioning information, is don't show it to everyone. Show it to one person, or show it to the two people are watching the security footage or listening to the phone call. Let them see it, and they have to relay what was in it to everyone else.
I have got to get you into a game of public access. Like this is like you're speaking my language here. This is great.
So that's a good fun thing to do. And then finally, right, this is something I think is, you could do it in real life, but the only time it's really ever, well, I've tried it and it worked incredibly well, was the unannounced guest star. Because you could have someone hiding in the adjoining room in your house.
Yes.
But online, you can just add a new person to the chat.
You can just drop them in. Yeah.
Monster Hearts, we had a thing where in episode 1, someone had accidentally been killed. Someone got pushed down some stairs and ended up in the hospital. And then episode 2, one of the PCs went to the hospital and killed that person for reasons that are as opaque to me now as they were then. But several weeks later, one of our originally planned players who hadn't been able to join us before then was able to show up for like one episode or two. So we decided he was going to play the ghost of that dead character.
Yeah, that's
cool.
Like
the moment when they sort of, I can't remember how we brought it in, but the thing was, you were talking about the environment. Graham, the best guest star in the world, he had done this whole thing. I thought he was just going to show up and be, hey, it's me, guys, when we dropped him in. No. He turned off all the lights in his room. He had like a cowl over his face. Nice.
That's so good.
And it was absolutely freaking out everyone. And the best thing was we got to do it twice, because the player whose character had done the murder wasn't there that week. So we all just agreed to keep it a secret. And then we did it to her the following week. It's great. So again, online you can do it. And again, it is to do with the format of a role-playing game as well.
Say more about that. That's interesting.
I think it's because it's an embodied, let's say, art form.
Yeah.
It's not pushing pieces around on a board. You can't surprise someone with a guest star in a board game, really.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's why, you could do it in person as well. You could have someone walk through the door. Whoa, it's me, I'm playing the ghost. But it is to do with how
the logistics are very hard. Yeah.
It's to do with all that. It's to do with the fact that that speaking is also doing in a role-playing game in a way that it isn't in other games, I think. Yeah, the possibilities are endless.
I would also like to give a shout to, this is a slightly a side topic, but I would also like to give a shout to listeners. I really, really think you will be well served by creating a particular table culture that is not scared of table talk, speaking out of character, and breaking so-called immersion, which I famously hate the idea of because I don't think it's real. But
I think it is. I just think you can drop in and out of it quicker than people believe.
Yeah. It's not that bad to drop in and out of it, right? Yeah. It doesn't break your immersion to do that, especially if you have developed a table culture that can do that. And once you've got that particular table culture established, it allows you to do some of this stuff like Tom and I are talking about, right? Like it allows you to sort of more ably and nimbly take chances and do things that the players won't see coming. And even if it's something that's a little odd, or it's something that might like quote unquote break immersion, or might require like a lot of suspension of disbelief, you've created a table culture where the players want to do it. They want to do it. They want to lock in and they want to do the thing that you're excited to do, this like cool thing you've decided to do. And so yeah, anyway, I don't know. It was an all over the place topic, but I think we got somewhere with it.
Yeah, messing around and doing fun things online. That's
fun things online.
That's the way to roleplay, guys.
Indeed. Fantastic. Let's go to the next segment. It's companion adventures. Mine are both kind of cheating, so I'll do them first.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Well, I mean, we're a little thin this time. Is it because Crown of Salt is so... Yeah. So sui generis? It might be. I couldn't think of anything that's like this, you know?
That's what I'm going with.
Yeah.
Crown of Salt, your itch.io purchase comes with a whole soundtrack.
I listened to that. Crown Thank you for... it's good.
It's like 12 tracks or something. It's a whole full soundtrack. It's great, and it fits it terrifically, and I recommend it strongly. My other recommendation is my YouTube run of Crown of Salt. It's 6 sessions. I think there's a lot of good stuff on my YouTube channel, especially if you are trying to learn how to play one of the games that I publish. But I happen to think the Crown of Salt, I think it's the best thing on my channel. I really do. I think it's the best thing on my channel. It is from start to finish. I have never felt more powerful as a GM. I've never felt more effective. The players were killing it at every step, and you can see what the module is doing at every step as well. And as a little side bonus, if you're curious about how I convert old school modules to Trophy Gold specifically, you can literally have it open as you're watching me run the game and see every single thing I'm doing. Right? Like,
that's true.
And because Crown of Salt is not that text dense, it's mostly just like images, you can follow along really easily. I've had people tell me that already. They're like, I was able to just have it open and watch what you were doing and look at the module, and I instantly got what you were doing. And so it's good for that as well. If somebody said, what's the one thing on your channel to watch, I'd recommend that. At this time, it would be Crown of Salt. So,
nice.
What's your rec?
Mine is, minimal, as I said. I was going to do some kind of, check out these good bleached white desert scenes from movies, but we've all seen all those movies, Good, the Bad and the Ugly, Mad Max. It doesn't matter. But I will talk about music a bit. If the Crown of Salt soundtrack is not enough for you, I think you want to be looking at gothic country. Now, of course, country music in general is quite gothic. There's a lot of revenge and murder and adultery, but specifically there is a subgenre called gothic country, which has this slightly apocalyptic.
I've never heard of this.
Book of Revelations. Yeah, it's I think it's a more like 2010s onwards thing.
Okay.
Specifically, I will recommend, just to give you something to go and look for, the Sons of Perdition and their 2013 album Trinity, which is full of all the kind of haunting, doomy, bleak, acoustic guitar-led music that I think is good for all the travel sequences, I think, in Crown of Salt. Once you get into the dungeon, you probably want to go back to the soundtrack. But yeah, certainly for the lonesome journey into the depths, that's what you want. Bit of gothic country.
Fantastic. Listeners, that's our show. Fear of a Black Dragon is a production of The Gauntlet. Our website is gauntlet-rpg.com. We're on Blue Sky at Gauntlet RPG. And as ever, we would love your support on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/gauntlet. Right now, if you make a $2 or higher pledge, you can join my aforementioned West Marches campaign, which we're going to talk about a lot more in a future episode. So I recommend that. And it's just a great way of supporting the show. And if you're not able to support the show financially, even if you are able to support the show financially, go give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We love that. It helps the show find new listeners. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks, as ever, to our essential editor, Rich Rogers. And thank you, listeners, for listening. Goodbye.
Take care.